The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, we are going to get started in just a few minutes, but in the meantime, thank you for joining the webinar. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
I wonder if she wants to shift the lecture onto the light. Would that help or hurt? No. Should have a better shine. Squeaky bald head.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the City Accelerator webinar series. My name is Matt Baer, and I am the project manager for this work here at Living Cities. City Accelerator is a special initiative of Living Cities, proudly supported by the City Foundation, which helps to accelerate the adoption of innovations within and across local governments. The third City Accelerator cohort focused on resilience, equity, and innovation in urban infrastructure finance. 4 cities came together for 18 months to figure out how to equitably fund critical infrastructure for their residents. By addressing aging infrastructure, building resilience, and mending inequality all at the same time, these cities are taking a non-traditional approach that can stand up to today's biggest challenges. These webinars are designed to give you first-hand accounts of the types of practices that can be scaled all across the country. Today's webinar feature is Green Infrastructure for Brownfields, Financing Stormwater Solutions in St. Paul. Our presenters are Wes Saunders-Pierce, Water Resources Coordinator, and Michael Solomon, City Treasurer, both from the City of St. Paul. We also have Jen Mayer joining us. Jen is the cohort lead for this project and has more than 25 years of experience advising federal, state, and local transportation and environmental agencies on infrastructure, finance, and policy. A couple of quick housekeeping items. On the right side of your screen, you'll find a questions/chat box. Please feel free to type in your questions as the presentation is moving along, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible at the end. If you're dialing in by phone, please make sure that you are muted. And finally, we'll be recording this whole presentation today, and we will send it around to everyone on the webinar after the call. So with that, I will turn things over to the City of St. Paul team for the webinar. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. This is Wes Saunders-Pierce. I'm the Water Resource Coordinator, and as Matt said, I'm joined by Mike Solomon, our Treasurer for the City of St. Paul. And we're going to take the opportunity to share with you our 18-month deep dive into innovative financing for stormwater infrastructure through the City Accelerator opportunity provided by Living Cities and City Foundation. And really what we're going to talk about is how it catalyzed our Rain as a Resource program here in St. Paul. To get into that, I'd like to give a little background first. I'm sorry, here we go. So give a little background first as to where this program started from and the details on our financing approach, and then we'll summarize at the end with our outcomes and some lessons learned. Our Rain as a Resource program involves 3 opportunity sites. They're very similar in some ways. They're all vacant brownfields. There's no infrastructure design. There's no cost estimates for the infrastructure, and none of these sites are in city control. There is a variety of differences that distinguish these sites, in particular their scale, the timing of the redevelopment, as well as the master developer relationships. In particular, the Snelling Midway site, which is on the lower left of your screen, is a 35-acre site where the city is looking to pursue rainwater harvesting and reuse opportunities. The West Side Flats in the middle of your screen is a site about 40 acres in size where the city is hoping to deliver a linear greenway that will help to connect to the Mississippi River for that future neighborhood. And then at the long end of the horizon, the Ford Motor Plant is about a 135-acre site, which is an opportunity for the city to recreate a historic creek that formerly used to flow to the Mississippi River, but was buried when the site was developed many decades ago. Our opportunity really started about in 2010, looking at rain as a resource along our new light rail corridor that connected the downtown of St. Paul to the downtown of Minneapolis. This work has evolved incrementally over time. And in particular, the first step in that was a planning framework called Strategic Stormwater Solutions for Transit-Oriented Development, which evaluated, among other sites, our Snelling Midway site. A few years later, with some EPA assistance, we looked closely at the West Side Flats, where we put some concepts together for the Greenway. About 2 years ago, we did an analysis for the Ford site, also looking at sustainable stormwater solutions. But ultimately, these incremental steps have been brought under a cohesive umbrella through the City Accelerator program to help us figure out how to deploy innovative infrastructure and provide the horsepower for us to do that. And as we get further in the presentation, we'll talk about some of the questions and answers that we've been able to provide through our work. Ultimately, what we are moving towards is a rain as a resource program through these incremental steps. And our rain as a resource program really is looking at using stormwater and stormwater infrastructure to increase neighborhood vitality by creating visible systems that process water naturally. And our framework is really based on what we call a shared stacked green infrastructure. And what that means is we're looking to provide stormwater infrastructure that treats runoff from multiple properties, whether it's public and private or whatever the relationship is. It's a shared system, a common system, also called a district system or a comprehensive system. There's a lot of different phrases for it, but we're looking to stack the systems so that we can get more value just managing stormwater. And so we want to have recreational outcomes or amenity outcomes. We're really stacking the functions on one particular site where our stormwater is being treated. So this rain as a resource program has evolved incrementally over time, but really what we're trying to do is accomplish more value with the same or less investment. So this is a new way for us in St. Paul to deliver infrastructure. And really what we're looking at through these brownfield sites is a comprehensive view, like I mentioned. It's a way to look more creatively at how to install stormwater infrastructure that not only controls stormwater, treats stormwater runoff, but provides multiple values to the community and to the development sector as well. This is a conceptual illustration from the analysis a few years ago at the Ford site, and it just depicts conventionally in St. Paul, we would expect as projects unfold and parcels develop, each parcel would be managing stormwater on its own site. And you can see on the left the little squares that represent that. And what we aspire to is really a centralized system. And at the Ford site, we envision a recreated historic stream that provides that green infrastructure benefit for stormwater and for the community. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike's going to talk a little bit more about the financial situation and where we're headed with that through our City Accelerator program.
Thanks, Wes. So you might be asking, why is the Office of Financial Services involved in this conversation about green stormwater? And I get to bring the fun slide of the challenge to the table. So like most cities, you can see that the city of St. Paul has budget pressures. Our spending, shown in the blue line, is inflated annually, while our revenues, without any action taken by the city, are held flat. So as we talk about the city's desire to have this new infrastructure delivery model, the question comes up, why doesn't the city just pay for this? Well, you can see there that our spending with inflation far outpaces our revenue, and there's always pressure to keep property taxes and other governmental revenues in check. And so it certainly is a funding challenge for the city to incentivize this kind of infrastructure in a new delivery model, as we've talked about. So unanswered questions. The questions come up with this new model is, how do we pay for it? The precedent in the city of St. Paul is that developers have traditionally paid for their stormwater solutions on their site. So given that precedent, if the city was to participate, how would we recover some of these costs? And furthermore, how would developers buy into this model? You know, what positives can we show them that would incentivize them to be our partners in this endeavor? And furthermore, given our traditional stormwater infrastructure and maintenance of that infrastructure, how would we maintain this new type of infrastructure over time? This is a cool graphic that Wes has included here that shows the cup for green infrastructure might be full. You know, given the initiative that we've taken on with the City Accelerator, the city's capacity with the small group that we've convened seems to be full. And so the question comes up of, how do we address a future pipeline of projects? How do we divide and conquer these institutional roles and responsibilities when we have our traditional city system that's fairly siloed into its traditional buckets of public works, planning, economic development, finance. And this opportunity with City Accelerator was really a great way to bring that interdepartmental participation together to talk about what kind of institutional roles and responsibilities make sense given this new form of infrastructure delivery that comes with its own new challenges as far as operations and maintenance, financing, planning, and economic development. So the financial framework. As we worked through the process with City Accelerator and our interdepartmental group here, some of the major assumptions that we were able to work with were that the city would help to pay upfront costs of construction. This is really the only tool we have to kind of incentivize this new form of infrastructure delivery and get developers on board with this new form of stormwater treatment, is to have the city participate and help to pay some of those upfront construction costs. Another assumption was to maintain the precedent that developers would pay for their infrastructure. And so with the city paying upfront costs, we developed a model to recover those upfront costs while maintaining our precedent of developers participating in the financing. The next assumption was that the city would own and maintain the system. This kind of came from some of our interdepartmental dynamics. Stormwater being public infrastructure, there was a strong feeling that the city should own this system and a strong desire to control the maintenance of the new system. The fourth assumption was that we would need to generate new maintenance revenue to maintain this new infrastructure. Obviously, we have a fully built out downstream stormwater infrastructure that comes with its own fixed costs. And so in order to install and maintain and operate our new shared stacked green stormwater, we would need to generate new maintenance revenue to support those costs. So what approach did we take given those assumptions? We came up with the approach of the Green Infrastructure Financing District. These districts are going to be formed across the city, we hope, and we talked about our 3 sites that we're focused on at this point. These districts would be formed, and the financing of them would be independent of the capital source. We have a framework that would have the city participating in the upfront construction cost and would help to recover those costs given some of our assumptions before. The other goal of the Green Infrastructure Financing District is to support the operation and maintenance of these facilities. Again, a new form of infrastructure needs a new way to support the operations and maintenance since we still have our fixed costs in our existing system. Another part of the Green Infrastructure Finance approach is replicability. We wanted this model to be able to be utilized citywide. While we have 3 sites in mind right now, there are certainly opportunities for redevelopment across the city, and we see this as an important aspect of future redevelopment opportunities. And the final key part of our approach here is reinvestment. Wes will talk about some more of the details to come, but the green infrastructure financing approach may result in a revolving fund type structure that we hope will be able to invest citywide, and certainly our projections and forecasts of the numbers that we'll talk about support that idea that reinvestment might be possible in a revolving fund type model as we look to replicate the green infrastructure financing district approach across multiple sites. So we talked a little bit about the city participating in upfront financing of these green infrastructure financing districts, and the desire for the city to be in charge of operating and maintaining the stormwater infrastructure. And so we talked about how can we finance this O&M. We've got our storm sewer service charge. That is a citywide charge that's applied per acre by use, similar to many cities. And to continue the operations and maintenance financing of these new sites, we're going to continue to charge that while supporting our further downstream infrastructure. So the dual method we took is to retain the base fees within the district and then to apply district-specific surcharges. So this allows the ability for us to charge our existing fees to support the costs within the district while also assessing specific surcharges to the district itself for those benefiting properties. And as we design these systems and these systems get built and we get a little bit of experience in each of these sites, we're going to have to figure out what the costs are going to be for the specific operations and maintenance needs on each site. So that's certainly been a challenge, and we'll talk a little bit about how this process has been very helpful in figuring those costs and other aspects out. So really the grant from City Foundation and the City Accelerator project really helped guide our pathways to success. They really gave us a lot of tools that accelerated our ability to answer a lot of the questions that we couldn't answer before. And we couldn't answer those questions because we didn't really have a lot of experience internally with this kind of infrastructure. We didn't have the interdepartmental effort examining these questions. And really, we didn't have a centralized budget or project to get some of these questions answered. So that's where some of the grant dollars and the program really helped get that interdepartmental group together and then finance some outside experts to help us answer some of these questions. So some key aspects of the pathway to success that came out of the program were certainly financial analysis. So much of this financing concept comes down to the cash flow and what the cash flow of these different green infrastructure financing districts looks like. Obviously, we're talking about long-term capital assets that are going to far outlive any one person's career at the city or anything like that. So we want to make sure we have experts that have seen this type of infrastructure in the field and know what they're dealing with in the development community to develop a nice cash flow and what an appropriate connection fee should be to participate in a green infrastructure financing district. Similarly, since this was new infrastructure, figuring out what the operations and maintenance costs and revenue should be and how that cash flows was another important part of our financial analysis. We were able to host the city's first green infrastructure forum that brought together both city, county, watershed officials, as well as some private sector developers, our port authority, and then we were able to fly in some experts from across the country to give some insight into their experience in the design, financing, operations, and maintenance of green infrastructure in places like Washington, D.C., Toronto, and throughout the Midwest. We worked with the University of Minnesota's Metro Lab network. They were able to put some real research hours into stormwater case studies, compiling what kind of costs were associated with different stormwater projects and help us with the fee in lieu compilation. We did a green infrastructure capacity study that said really within the city and city departments, what kind of capacity do we have for green infrastructure in St. Paul? We utilized experts and consultants on the operations and maintenance cost estimation. Again, being cognizant that each of these sites is unique and has individual pressures on financing, operations, and maintenance needs. We'll talk a little bit more about West Side Flats and then Snelling Midway, which are kind of our furthest along sites as far as some baseline design and things of that nature. And the operations and maintenance cost estimates were really helpful because, again, internally we don't have a lot of expertise in operating and maintaining this type of infrastructure. So bringing in experienced experts was helpful in that case. Also, baseline cost research. I think we'll talk a little bit more about a goal of the Green Infrastructure Financing District being a standardized cost for connections and hookup. And in order to get to what that cost should be, having a lot of baseline cost research was very important to the process. And then finally, an operations and maintenance agreement and kind of roadmap is our last step that's still in progress, figuring out how do we best structure agreements with developers regarding the operations and maintenance of these systems that they're going to be hooking up to, and what is our roadmap as far as putting the right legal framework in place to ensure that the city and taxpayers are protected when entering into these deals with private developers in the Green Infrastructure Financing District model. So with that, I'll kick it back to Wes to talk about some of our outcomes.
Excellent. Great job, Mike. And I'm going to wrap up our discussion this afternoon with a few concluding slides. And in particular, one that I really think is important is this whole process has been about building the plane while we're flying it. This sort of approach, I don't think we could ever develop in the abstract or in concept. And we really needed a development partner to move along with us as we work through the framework and the logistics of how this would work. You know, it was certainly very challenging. I'm not sure if the plane that we built was what any of us really expected it to look like. But in particular, for the last 2 years, we've had the opportunity to work with the professional Major League Soccer franchise, the Minnesota United, at the Snelling Midway site. And that's helped us realize a shared system to harvest rainwater across a 35-acre development parcel, all of which was done without a roadmap. As Mike had said, we're still building that roadmap, we're still building that process. So we had a very strong development partner willing to explore the value and the benefits of this type of approach. And where we're at right now is our city council just approved the budget and plans to move into this comprehensive or shared rainwater harvesting system at the Snelling Midway site. So a very exciting milestone for us. Just very recently, that was about 3 weeks ago, and a lot of effort leading up to that. But in particular, as I said, building the plane while we're flying it, this is an aerial view of the Snelling Midway Superblock, and you can see this is from the end of August, and the site is under construction. They're moving dirt, and the soccer stadium is coming out of the ground. You can see the square, which is the 35-acre Superblock parcel, some of which is actually currently developed shopping mall that will be transformed into future land uses once the stadium is completed. But this is our Green Infrastructure Financing District for the Snelling Midway area. So it's a 35-acre site, and you can see that as we've been really trying to figure out how this framework comes together, this infrastructure literally is coming together in the ground. So really where we're at with outcomes and our lessons learned, you know, one of the biggest things for us is how are we going to fully memorialize this Green Infrastructure Financing District? We have it established that the City Council has empowered the funding and the approach for this Superblock, but we really want to make sure that the connection charge approach, as Mike had mentioned, and the revenue generation model for the O&M, which utilizes our storm sewer service charge or our stormwater utility fee, we really want to make sure that gets institutionalized beyond the City Council's decision. We need to make sure it's replicable, and we really hope to codify that. And the final deliverable in our effort will lay out some of that legal framework recommendation. So that's a challenge. How do we get that institutionalized? But another challenge for us is, you know, really what we're doing is we're investing infrastructure now, hoping that redevelopment will come, particularly with the Snelling Midway site and the soccer stadium that's going to catalyze huge investment for ancillary development. But how long is it going to take to build out that 35-acre Superblock, only half of which is for the stadium? We'll have about 18 plus or minus acres of private development to come. So, we're really trying to marry up the timing of development with how we pay back the funds, and some of that gets into what Mike was talking about. That sweet spot might leave us with a reserve to invest in a future site. But then as we work through this, the decisions and the challenges, really we've struggled with what is the willingness to pay. Some of it is how much are people willing to pay for operation and maintenance? What can we demonstrate is reasonable? We did research to indicate what a standard connection charge should be. So, we did that legwork, but again, it comes down to perceptions of willingness to pay. And then as well, really that capacity. That's really a huge part for St. Paul. We know we have the West Side Flats as a second opportunity site, and we've been in discussion with the developer there. We don't have a development agreement yet, but we know, that might be, a site that's, imminent in the next few years. The Ford site, a very, very strong opportunity on the bluffs of the Mississippi River. That might be a little farther out, but we've got future work to do. And how do we make sure that we really have enough capacity between the different departments and staff and all the technical work that needs to happen to really make that a successful reality. So those are things that are not unlike other communities around the country struggling with emerging green infrastructure programs, and that's one for sure that we have as well. But finally, in terms of lessons learned, and I like to deliver this message because I'm not a financial person, I'm a hydrologist by training. And what I've really come to learn over 18 months, the problem to solve is revenue. It's not financing. It seems apparent that, alternative financing sources are fairly available if you can find the right dialogues. But really the problem to solve is revenue. Where's the money going to come from to pay back that initial financing source? For us, we were able to successfully advocate using connection charges and a storm sewer service charge as a way to make that work. This image here is of Canal Park in Washington, D.C., and we had the opportunity through our City Accelerator program to visit that site and talk with those investors there. And they used a business improvement district approach to develop their revenue. But however you do it, that's really one of the key takeaways. It's not the financing, it's the revenue. That's really the key challenge. With that, that concludes our presentation on green infrastructure for brownfields and financing stormwater solutions in St. Paul. I haven't been checking the chat box, so I don't know if people have been submitting questions, but Matt, I'll turn it over to you to see if we have other things to talk about. Thank you all for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We have gotten a few questions in. As a reminder, you can use the chat box on the side of the screen to submit your questions. We have a lot of people on the call today. Question that has come in about the green infrastructure capacity study. Is that looking at how much infiltration they think they can handle, or at some other type of capacity?
The green infrastructure capacity study that we performed really was more of a organizational and institutional assessment rather than a technical or computational analysis. We have done work in the past, a few years ago, to look citywide relating to that aspect. Where can we infiltrate? Where do we have opportunities and so forth? We have that completed a few years ago. This was really more, how do we want to use our resources organizationally, our human resources, to the best way possible.
Great, thanks. Can you tell us a little bit more about the connection charge you were talking about that you anticipate administering?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that is the foundation of our approach is to recover the initial capital cost that the city is going to provide. And so what we're proposing and what got adopted for the Snelling Midway area is that as future development come online, they would connect to the district or shared stormwater infrastructure. And as part of having that benefit available for them, we would require that they pay a connection charge. So that's a one-time charge that would be assessed or would be paid at the time of a building permit. The private property would have the option to have that charge assessed to their property over time, so they wouldn't have to necessarily pay it immediately up front. But it really stems from work that we did over the last year researching the typical costs of private development stormwater management on site. So we looked at a number of development years from 2012 to 2015, I think, and reached out and surveyed those sites to determine what their costs were, did some analysis. But that connection charge approach really is something that will scale up through time for inflation, but will really allow the city to provide a clear roadmap to that future development of what they can expect for a charge for right now what is a very soft and murky cost. So it gives them certainty, it gives them clarity, but then again, they get the benefit of not only connecting to this district system, they also have the benefit of all the additional amenities that it provides adjacent to their development property.
Thanks. Another question about community engagement. Was that a challenge? Was sort of getting folks aware of this area and the potential for green stormwater? Was kind of building community awareness and support for the project a challenge, and how did you overcome it?
In St. Paul, we're heavily invested in community engagement. The Ford site probably is at the extreme end of our community engagement process, where over many years we had probably over 40 meetings with the public to talk about our intentions for guiding redevelopment at that site, and being able to bring forward a variety of topics, in particular the recreated Hidden Falls Creek was one of those topics, and that was a really good opportunity for us to test our ideas and really help the people in the community understand what we were trying to accomplish. And that's a very high profile site, so we didn't necessarily have a lot of difficulty getting people to come to those discussions. The West Side Flats is an area where we spent a lot of time with community engagement. Some of that work was actually supported by EPA brownfield grants. And we, for instance, in April of 2017, we organized, among other events that we've done for community outreach of redevelopment of the West Side Flats, we organized a specific event that allowed us to have direct interaction with community members, explaining to them what we're trying to accomplish with our linear greenway. And we had a cool outcome where we had participants plant sunflower seeds in 5-gallon buckets, paint the buckets, and then stack those buckets along the greenway alignment so we could actually represent out in the field where that was. I think it was a great way for people to see something that right now is just vacant land. And so that was a good experience for us. But the West Side Flats, there I think, it's not as high profile of a development. So we really did have to be more focused and specific, targeted about making sure we had people aware of these outreach events and we're really clear about what we're trying to accomplish. And then the Snelling Midway site, there was a very, very concerted public engagement process there. It was very accelerated, no pun intended for the City Accelerator program. It was very accelerated. So we were able to really bring some of these ideas out on the table, but just because there were so many other things that people were passionate about, whether it was parking, transportation, noise, etc., the stormwater piece got a little bit overshadowed. So we've had a public engagement focus for all 3 sites, but the thing that I'd like to leave the audience with, and this is really kind of, I think, the big win that we have with City Accelerator, is we've been able to really brand our approach, this Rain as a Resource approach. We put together a video, a 5-minute video that is on our city website, and we have a landing page. If you just Google St. Paul Rain as a Resource, you'll find it. And I think really our outcome there, where we've coalesced these initiatives, as Mike had mentioned earlier, into kind of a unified or a centralized initiative, has been extremely helpful. So it's just much more cohesive and powerful of a message to provide to the community about what we're trying to accomplish.
Great. We have a 2-part question. First part is, what was the thinking behind the city building the infrastructure itself and charging developers to connect versus requiring developers to build it themselves? And then the second part is, do you have a formula for calculating how many developed sites can connect into the shared system before the city has to build another to accommodate all that development? So first about who's building, and second about how many can connect.
Those questions are really thoughtful. I'm glad they were asked. The first question, and I'll let Mike jump in if he's got some things to contribute. Really the thinking about the city making the investment partially was, we know that if we ask the developer to make that investment, it's probably only going to increase their gap, their development gap. It's just, we knew that we would be in a better, more stable position to provide that and allow the development to occur over time, and have them pay that cost back as they come online. Mike, you want to share a little bit?
Right. Really, when you talk about the developers and incentivizing them to participate in this new type of infrastructure delivery, it's a way that the city can kind of take that risk of a new thing off of the table. One of our first questions we started with was, how do we get developers to buy in? And the ability to say, you don't have to worry about contamination or other site-specific issues. When constructing your own traditional stormwater network, you can in fact just pay a one-time fixed charge to plug into the city's system. That kind of risk mitigation, I think, offers a lot of benefit to the development community. And when Wes mentioned their pro forma, they're all looking at a bottom line number, and anything that adds risk to that number is going to be a deterrent. And so we see this as a way to incentivize the community to participate in the new green infrastructure financing district model. The second part of the question was more along the formula for our standard hookup fee. Is that right?
I'm not sure. Could you
repeat that?
Yeah, can you repeat?
Yep, sure. So it was, do you have a formula for calculating how many developed sites can connect into the shared system before the city has to build another one to accommodate all the development moving in?
Got it. So, I'll certainly let Wes and the science engineering folks answer the specific question there. But when we talk about our targeted 3 sites, things are being sized for full development. So I think that's an important aspect of the approach. If we did, in the Snelling Midway site, we are just kind of working with one developer. When you talk about a site the scale of the Ford site, that's going to have a 20 to potentially 30-year build-out period. You need that kind of patient capital of the city to come in, build out this infrastructure for the site for full capacity, and then wait to be repaid by these kind of connection fees. If we had followed the traditional method, then yes, you would have that parcel by parcel build out of stormwater solutions. But a big part of our approach is the fact that the city will kind of take that upfront cost, allow developers to hook up, and that capacity will be there for the site. Wes, I don't know if you want to add any of the science behind capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, I think you had it pretty well captured. We're sizing these regional systems for the entire development area for ultimate development. So, how they get implemented, whether they get built all at once, for instance, like we're pursuing at Snelling Midway, or at Ford, where it's 135-acre ultimate development drainage area, we may phase that infrastructure in over time. We're still trying to understand exactly how that's going to unfold. But that's how we're calculating the system, is we're just sizing it for ultimate development. I can say we've been, there is somewhere in there, there's an optimization that we haven't quite put our finger on, but you do need a certain level of drainage area or service area or benefiting area to make these systems cost beneficial. I can say that anecdotally. I can't really put something, put my finger on it formally, but that's some of our experience in working through this. There is a sweet spot in there somewhere. You can't have them, you can't get the drainage areas or the service areas too small. So we've kind of looked at that. But does that answer the question? I think that should answer the question.
It seems like it does. Well, all right. If there are no other questions, I think that'll do it for today's webinar. Like I said, we'll be sending out the recording link for this to everyone on the call shortly. And we also have lots of other resources about this City Accelerator cohort for you at governing.com/City Accelerator. That's governing.com/City Accelerator. You can read the new guide that we just published on infrastructure finance, listen to podcasts, read blogs from the cohort cities, including one from St. Paul, and from Jen Mayer, and learn more about the program. You can also join us for our next set of webinars next week from San Francisco and Pittsburgh on Monday and Wednesday. I'd like to thank our presenters today and also thank you all very much for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon.